So now turning to our program, please welcome Phil Vollrath, Vice President, Public Affairs for Armed Forces Week, to introduce our speaker. Phil?
Thank you very much, Kent. Incidentally, through some mistake of mine, I don't know, when they played the various service hymns, they played the Navy first, and I just sat there. I didn't know they were playing the Navy, so I'm very sorry about that. I was in the Navy. Yeah. I'm getting new hearing aids next week, so that should help that. I'd like to thank the mayor for joining us today for his proclamation, and I'd like to thank the many service members in our area. We hope you stopped the lobby to see the 50-foot inflatable submarine on display. This is a very tiny version of the new Wisconsin nuclear ballistic submarine currently under construction. It's being constructed in 3 different cities, and then it's going to be put together in one location. Its name honors our state and our rich maritime history. Joining us from the USS Wisconsin, our SSBN 827 Association staff, Jeff Davis, John Lindstedt, and Randy Ingnes. Could you stand, please? This is the 2nd submarine in the Columbia class and will be the most technologically advanced submarine ever built. There's more information on the submarine and the organization on your tables. You can sign up for their newsletter to keep informed on the ship's progress and opportunities to get involved. This is my favorite Rotary program of the year, not because I will introduce the speaker, but because I'm a Navy veteran myself. I have seen firsthand the many sacrifices our military and their families make to keep us safe. The thank yous are well deserved. I would like to begin by introducing some special guests who are here today. And would you stand as I mentioned your name, please? From the Armed Forces Week Committee, Tom Buck, who is the chair of the Armed Forces Week. Jim Pilko, Candy Art, and Jessica Valrath-Hibner, my daughter, along with representatives of the U.S. Marines, Navy, Coast Guard, and the 128th Air Refueling Wing. Please stand and be recognized if you are also members of the committee and I didn't mention your name. Also helping to make this meeting special are the Great Lakes Navy Band Woodwind Quintet and the Color Guard from the 128th Air Refueling Wing. Thank you all. Now to our speaker. We know fellow Rotarian Major General Brian Winski as the new president and CEO of the War Memorial Center. Today, he is our honored speaker with a long history of distinguished service in the U.S. Army. A decorated officer, Brian served the U.S. Army as a 2-star general after 37 years of service. His career included serving as a deputy commanding general of the 82nd Airborne Division at Fort Bragg, director of the Army Operations Directorate at the Pentagon, chief of Army Legislative Affairs at the Pentagon and Capitol Hill, and most recently as commanding officer of the famed 101st Airborne Division and Fort Campbell. Brian served as a rifle platoon leader in Operation Desert Storm, and after 9/11, he went on multiple combat deployments to Iraq Afghanistan, and other contingency areas. He was awarded the Combat Infantryman's Badge with Star, received the Distinguished Service Medal twice, the Legion of Merit 3 times, and the Bronze Star Medal 6 times, once for valor. A native of Wisconsin and a graduate of UWM's ROTC program, Brian holds a bachelor's degree from UWM and a master's degree from LSU. He is a graduate of Airborne Air Assault and Ranger School and a master-rated parachutist. Brian and his wife, Kimberly, have lived all over the United States and are happy to be back in Wisconsin. Both their son and daughter are U.S. Army officers. Please join me in welcoming Brian to the stage.
All right, everybody, good afternoon. Armed Forces Week is off to a great start. I'm super proud to be here. I'm super proud to have served in the United States Army and proud to be with you today celebrating Armed Forces Week. And I'm going to give you about as much as you can stomach on facts, figures, locations, size of the Army, and then I want to leave as much time as possible for Q&A. So I got the slide controller here. The Army mission, and I hit the wrong button. There we go. Is to deploy, fight, and win our nation's war in the land domain. It's as simple as that. That's what the Army prepares for. That's what the Army trains for. That's what the Army spends its budget on, is to make sure that all units are manned, trained, and equipped for the eventuality of full-scale combat operations. Some takeaways. The Army defends the nation 24/7. There's about 175,000 soldiers deployed at any given time, doing everything from what you see unfolding in the Middle East to peacekeeping and stability operations in the Sinai Peninsula to securing the U.S. southwest border and everything in between. More than 50% of all the forces in theaters that require force protection, that's provided by the Army. So again, thousands of soldiers in harm's way protecting key assets across the globe. We train with our allies to do a couple of things. One, solidify alliances and partnerships, and then to deter adversaries through that level of training and those partnerships. The Army is the premier response force for everything from domestic response, like fighting wildfires, securing the southwest border, reacting to hurricanes in the southeast United States, and everything in between. And the Army is undergoing a pretty significant transformation that I'm really looking forward to the Q&A portion because I'm certain there's going to be some questions on that. Okay, the Army is about 950,000 strong. It's the biggest of all the services. It's the oldest of all the services. The active component is about 450,000 soldiers. That's down about 75,000 from about 5-6 years ago or so. The Army Guard parallels the regular Army in terms of its fundamental structure and roles. It's an operational and strategic reserve, and it is at about 325,000. The most significant Guard elements here in Wisconsin are the 32nd Brigade, and there's a number of enabling and supporting capabilities in the Army Guard throughout the state. About 1,000 Wisconsin Guardsmen are deployed as we speak in the Middle East and the CENTCOM area of responsibility. The Army Reserve, the large concentrations here are mainly medical units, engineer units, et cetera. The biggest base is up on Silver Spring Drive there. That's why I started my Army career in the Army Reserve. Again, much smaller, but a lot of key capability like military police, as I said, engineering, medical, et cetera. And then Army civilians, those that man the Pentagon and fill out the Army staff, to those that work for the Corps of Engineers and everything in between. So a pretty sizable organization. And it's all built around our combat formations. So there's about 4 types of maneuver brigade combat teams in the Army. In the top left there, you see Infantry Brigade Combat Team. That's, the high demand units in contingencies like Afghanistan, Iraq, anywhere where you're fighting in a city, in mountainous terrain, jungle terrain, Arctic terrain. It's the Infantry Brigade Combat Teams that fill most of those missions. There's, for total brigades, 59 in the entire Army, 32 are in the regular Army, 27 are in the Army Guard. For infantry brigades, 14 are in the regular Army, and 20 are in the National Guard. Again, infantry brigades, about 5,000 soldiers or so. On the top right, you see the Armor Brigade Combat Team. This is the heavyweight champion of the world force. We have far fewer of them, but they're incredibly lethal, incredibly powerful. Built around the Abrams tank and the Bradley fighting vehicle that you see there. There's 11 of these brigade combat teams in the active component and 5 in the National Guard. The Stryker Brigade Combat Team in the bottom left is kind of a medium force, really favored in Europe, and it was also had some utility in Afghanistan and more so in Iraq. This is an infantry brigade with Stryker vehicles that provide them protected mobility so they can get to the fight, transiting far greater distances than foot infantry would be able to, dismount where the enemy can't see them and shoot at them, and then close that distance and eliminate the enemy. That's their forte. And then in the bottom right, our 4th Maneuver Brigade asset is our combat aviation brigades. We have lift capability in the Army. We have Blackhawks, Chinooks, and then Apache helicopters that are organized in recon squadrons or attack battalions. That's our kind of punch from the sky capability. And then there's a number of functional brigades in the Army as well. And I'll start from the top left. We talked about aviation, air and missile defense. So everything you see going on in the Middle East with all the intercepts, especially in and around Iran, but in and around Israel for the last number of years. The Theater High Altitude Air Defense System, the Patriot system, et cetera. These are the missiles that can shoot other missiles out of the sky before they get on a final trajectory to their target. Communication, the Army has a lot of the responsibility for theaters to establish communication. We have a lot of formations that do that. Engineer, again, a lot of it's in the Army Reserve, but a lot in the active Army as well, and it's all sorts of engineering, from construction to blowing things up to breaching minefields to what you see there, building bridges across rivers and everything in between. Sustainment, the Army, those Armor Brigade combat teams, each M1 tank burns 20 gallons of fuel in about 90 seconds time. So you can imagine the resupply challenges of those types of formations, and there's a lot in the Army force structure to sustain the rest of the Army. And then the bottom right, medical capability to establish everything from, if you remember in the early days of COVID, the Javits Hospital in New York City, that was manned by an Army Combat Support Hospital, to setting up in the field conditions everything that you'd expect out of a major metro medical treatment facility, from CT scans to the ability to treat trauma wounds, et cetera, and everything in between there as well. Army Special Operations Forces, there's a few flavors of this. The top right shows you 12 soldiers, they're Green Berets. That's the Army's foundational building block of our special forces. The ODAs are organized into 5 special forces groups, which are all regionally aligned, and their forte is to be able to cover down on a partner nation battalion-sized force of about 600 or 700 soldiers, advise them, train them, assist them. In the early days of Afghanistan, right on the heels of the attacks on our nation in 2001, you famously saw the horse soldiers later in a movie. They linked up with a partner force, the Northern Alliance, brought to bear the incredible firepower of the Air Force and air-delivered capability, and were able to, with this 12-soldier organization, fight and destroy sizable enemy formations. In the top right, you see the Special Ops Aviation Regiment. This was born of the Iran hostage crisis of 1979-1980. This is a specially equipped, specially trained, highly trained helicopter force. You saw them in the news in the Venezuela operation not too long ago, and you saw in the news more recently operations in Iran as well. Very capable and very unique organization. In the bottom left is the 75th Ranger Regiment. These are essentially highly selected, highly trained infantry battalions that are our premier raid force. So anytime there's any of these things that you see in the news where an ISIS leader is eliminated in Syria, they have a part of that operation. They're, again, highly trained, highly capable. And there's 3 battalions, 1 at Fort Lewis, Washington on the West Coast, and then 2 in Georgia. And then the bottom right is some Army unique PSYOPs and civil affairs aspects of PSYOPs, which are really important. This is post-conflict, kind of help a country get back on its feet and those sorts of functions. Okay, this is way too busy to go through, but in general terms, the Army is where the Army can make a lot of noise, blow stuff up, and not make too many people unhappy about it. So you got a lot of big bases, and where the Army could eminent domain land in major scale at the outbreak of World War II. So, out in the West, you have troops up at Fort Lewis, Washington, out in California at our training center. In the middle part of the country there are where most of our armor brigades are. They're in West Texas, in El Paso, and Central Texas at Fort Hood, as well as Fort Riley and Fort Riley, Kansas, and Fort Carson, Colorado. And then as you go to the southeast, that's where more of our infantry brigade and Stryker brigade formations are. You notice nothing really highlighted in Wisconsin, but there is, and it'd be an impossible overlay. There's soldiers in every zip code in America. It may be a recruiter, it may be a guardsman, it may be a reservist, it may be somebody that works at an ROTC detachment or anything like that. Fort McCoy, I think everybody's familiar with, up near Toma, Sparta, is one of the main reserve component power projection platforms. When a unit kind of gets activated to deploy somewhere, they'll go there for their final training, and it serves a number of other purposes for training the active guard and Army Reserve. And as I mentioned, the main National Guard unit in Wisconsin, Army Guard, is the 32nd Brigade. And again, there's about 1,000 Wisconsin Army Guardsmen deployed in the Middle East right now. Okay, and then overseas, these are permanently based forces overseas. We have a lot of rotational forces as well. In Germany, there's a Stryker Brigade. In Italy, there's an Airborne Infantry Brigade. In Hawaii, there's a Light Infantry Brigade. In Alaska, there's kind of a hybrid Light Infantry Airborne Brigade. And then in Korea, there's generally a Stryker Brigade with the 2nd Division there, 24/7. These are augmented by rotational troops in the form of brigades that rotate there for 9 months to augment the forces that are forward. As I said, about 127,000 soldiers are forward deployed, kind of going from left to right. Describe to you what they're doing. In our north, that's the continental United States, Canada, and Mexico. There's certainly more than 3,500 soldiers. There's more than 3,500 soldiers at Fort McCoy, but there's 3,500 that are committed to NORTHCOM for specific missions, and those 35 really are all the southwest border security from San Diego to Eagle Pass, Texas. In the R South, you see 1,800 soldiers, a relatively small footprint, generally conducting cooperative exercises with our partner military forces there. Same thing in Africa with 3,000 soldiers. Quite a few soldiers in Europe. You saw a little bit of this in the news of late, so who knows what that number is going to be in the weeks, months ahead. But right now we have forces in Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, Romania, Bulgaria, Germany, Poland, and other places supporting the fight with Ukraine and Russia. So quite a bit of effort and quite a bit of force of rail across Europe to deter adversary, i.e. Putin. Putin won't stop till he's stopped, and reassuring some of those smaller countries like those in the Baltics. In our CENT, that's the Middle East. It's probably a little higher than that now, a bunch more Army forces recently deployed, but this is all things Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Jordan, Israel, Syria, and all that surrounding area. Again, quite a few soldiers there. And then in U.S. Army Pacific, you see quite a few, 60,000, largely concentrated in Hawaii, Alaska. I talked about the 4 brigades that are at those 2 locations, and Japan. So that's where the Army is across the globe. And this is the last slide, so get ready for Q&A. The Army is standing watch in defense of the nation 24/7. The culture is to always be ready. If you are ready, you never have to get ready, and they're ready to respond on a moment's notice to any crisis that surfaces anywhere in the globe as part of the joint team. I got some pictures on the right of some things only the Army can do, but the Army can only do it with some significant help. So that airborne assault you see in the top right there, the air in that is provided by the United States Air Force. In the middle portion, you see, a shoreline, and without the support of our Navy brothers, the Army and the maritime domain, like right now, there's Apaches shooting Iran's Bass Boat Navy up, and that's been underway for some time. It couldn't be done if it were not part of the joint force. Okay, that was the Army overview in about 11 minutes. Let me tell you a little bit about my journey through some photos over time here. So that top left photo triggered an Amnesty International investigation as to why the U.S. Army is hiring 14-year-old child soldiers. But that's me, 17 years old. I was out. Okay, so a little bit of my background. I grew up here in Milwaukee, around 35th in Oklahoma area. I was always drawn from a very young age, playing Army and all that. But just when the World War II veterans would get together at a family barbecue, I'd be hanging on every word as they exchanged war stories. And my mom served in the 128th in the late 70s, 80s. My dad was a bosun's mate in the Navy in the 60s on the USS Fremont APA 44 in Norfolk. And my uncle was in the Marine Corps at the twilight of the Korean War. He had enough at that point, shifted over to the Navy, and ultimately retired from the Navy Reserve on the other end of the Hone Bridge there. So I had some great family influencers that really piqued my interest in the military. And I was in high school, the twilight of my 16th year, and a recruiter calls and goes, "We got this program where you can join if you can talk your mom and dad into signing, you can join when you're 17 and go to basic training between junior and senior year of high school, and then finish up your training right afterwards and then serve in the Army Reserve. So I jumped on it right away, and that's me, 17-year-old Winski in the top left, desperately in need of purpose, direction, motivation, and Sergeant Antoine Hemming saw to that in basic training and got me on a great path. That was my path to be able to go to college. You know, our family resources were such that if you're high school complete, you're a go find your path in life. And the Army provided a whopping $140 a month through the GI Bill then, which actually covered it. And I was able to go to UWM and did ROTC there and got my commission in the late 80s. And that second picture is me in Desert Shield, where I led a platoon of 42 soldiers in the 101st Airborne Division. And that was a seminal assignment for me. I mean, I was a young 22-year-old lieutenant, inherently inexperienced, but had some awesome non-commissioned officers that put some investment in me to make sure that I was squared away and we were doing the right things all the time. And it worked out. You know, we got through Desert Storm unscathed, and it was a searing, seminal early experience for me as a young second lieutenant of infantry in the 101st Airborne Division. The picture of me with the Saddam poster, that's the invasion of Iraq, 2003. Here I am, about a mid-grade major, second in command of an infantry battalion. And, that was another seminal and searing experience. But the start of a string of deployments that I'm going to talk about my family's contribution to things in a minute. But that was the start of a year gone, a year back. So the next picture over to the right in the top right corner is me in East Baghdad in 2005, 2006. Very tough year, hard fighting. A lot of Iranian-backed militia activity, a lot of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, just south of our area of operation. But it was a great experience, and it really illuminated the valor, the courage, the commitment, the dedication of our soldiers, and really inspired me to keep going, because I was at the point where I could have probably cashed it in and retired. So as a reward for staying on, I got sent to Afghanistan the following year, and that's me in the bottom left there. If you get anything out of that photo, the incredible terrain of the Hindu Kush Mountains there, that's East Nuristan near the Pakistani border. That was some experience as well. I threw in the one with the cav hat just because it's a cool hat, but my brigade command was in the 1st Cavalry Division down at Fort Hood, and we kind of adopted the cavalry traditions, and that's me in Mosul there. The next one over, rigged up, I'm 50 years old, and I get an assignment to start jumping out of planes again like I did when I was about 18 or 19, and there I am smiling on the surface, but probably a little more apprehensive than I otherwise would have been, but jumping out of in fact, that is a 440th Flying Badger C-130 that I was able to jump out with in Missouri. And then bottom right, my family. I wouldn't be anywhere without them. Every success I've enjoyed in my life has been a result of my service in the United States Army. I would have never been able to go to UWM. I would have never met my wife. We wouldn't have had our awesome kids. The kids kind of followed suit in the path of service. My daughter is a Black Hawk pilot and company commander in the 160th Special Ops Aviation Regiment. And then her brother, our son in the whites there, is a infantry company commander in the 82nd Airborne, and he served in the Range Regiment in Syria and some other places. Both of them are Afghanistan veterans and veterans of a bunch of other things going on across the globe. So my family, I'm super proud of them. And with that, let's take your questions.
Hey, Brian, I'm not Melissa, I'm Tom, pinch hitting for Melissa.
Okay.
Question, we hear a lot about proposed increases in the military budget next year. Do you think that that money or portion of that money should be used to create a larger army, given all of the commitments that you see around the world?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if this defense budget comes to pass, it's going to be significantly more than the past 10, 15 years or so, about 35, 40% more. The Army needs to modernize in a pretty significant way. Those tanks and Bradleys I showed you are heavyweight champions of the world, but they were made in the 1970s. And a $500 drone can take out a main battle tank. So we got to really modernize systems to deny that capability with our adversaries and enhance the protection and upgrade the fleet that we have. So if you look at all the Army major systems, the tank, the Bradley, the late 70s, early 80s, the Black Hawk, Chinook, the Black Hawk 70s, 80s, the Chinook 50s, 60s, all the major platforms are quite aged. They're about as modernized as they could possibly be. And you're starting to see some vulnerabilities, especially when you apply these asymmetric threats to them. So that's where a lot of the Army money will go to. Recruiting is pretty good now, and the Army would like to be at a higher end strength than it is right now. It's come down about 25,000 over the last just couple years. But that takes time, so if you up the authorization, you got to recruit, you got to train, and then ultimately get those soldiers to the formations. But the Army would want to do that, would want to increase force structure, but probably not some of the traditional stuff. We're probably good on infantry companies. We need a lot more multi-domain detachments that harness electronic warfare, harness cyber, have at their fingertips air deliverable drone capability that can quickly acquire stuff, confirm, deny what they're looking at through AI-enabled analysis, and hit go on a fire and forget kind of drone that'll eliminate that enemy threat without putting soldiers, airmen at risk. So great question. To sum it up, more end strength, yes, but a lot more modernization, yes. And what we do apply our additional funding for in end strength is probably going to be some of that multi-domain kind of capability. Did that answer your question?
Yep.
Perfect, okay.
Tom Gale, thank you for your service. You shared with me last week, would you share with everybody today, how have parachutes changed over the years, and can you fly parachutes in like we see them flying to stadiums on weekends? So
there's a couple flavors of parachuting. The most prevalent is static line tactical paradrop. This is 82nd Airborne Division. This is delivering over potentially strategic distances. So from the East Coast of the United States at Fort Bragg, delivering troops to a target in Poland with air-to-air refuel en route, and then conduct a parachute assault because the airfield's either obstacled or untenable. That type of parachuting, you're laden down with equipment like you got a little glimpse of in the picture there, and you're connected to the static line, anchor line in the aircraft. You're about 900 feet above ground level, and the idea is to get as many out as quickly as possible and descend to the ground as quickly as possible without sustaining a lot of injuries. So you're a very fleeting target for the enemy that may be covering that drop zone. Parachutes have evolved quite a bit since World War II. That was the advent of airborne warfare. The 101st and the 82nd famously jumped into Normandy, and the parachutes they had then were T-25s, much smaller, much simpler, but much higher rate of descent, like 24 feet per second. That'd be like jumping off your garage roof unassisted, or almost hanging from that chandelier and dropping. The parachute didn't change that much in the 50s, 60s. It got a little bit better in the 70s, 80s, but the equipment got heavier, the equipment got bigger, the paratroopers got bigger. You look at a World War II paratrooper, they're probably $160, $165. They were kids in the Depression and just lean. We're much bigger now. So we adopted a new parachute, which is the one you saw in the image. It's a much slower rate of descent, so more like about 17, 18 feet per second, and a much softer landing. And that was really a result of the combat jumps into Panama in 1989, where the airborne unit sustained more jump injuries than they sustained wounded from enemy action. So it's a high-risk thing to do, but it's something that only the Army with our Air Force partners can do. We can, again, launch from East Carolina and jump into Poland, in the course of about, a 24-hour period of time. Sure thing.
Good afternoon, John Winski. Thank you for that great talk.
Yeah.
I'm Dr. Doug Davis from Medical College of Wisconsin. I want to touch on something you mentioned, which was the war in Ukraine and some lessons from there. My wife is Ukrainian. I've been to Ukraine like 20 times. I've worked with some military surgeons like Colonel John Holcomb, and seen how Ukraine has evolved the medical combat casualty care domain, but also seen how, as you mentioned, these cheap drones and other things have challenged our exquisite systems. There was the Operation Hedgehog in Estonia, where 10 Ukrainian operators beat NATO in a war games. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are about, is the U.S. doing enough, the Army and the other services, to incorporate those lessons, and how can we do a better job of that?
Yeah, no, we definitely are. We have a lot of a lot of talent, a lot of folks focused on exactly that. A lot of elements that are directly liaising with the Ukrainian military at all echelons. As we train them on equipment that we provide, as we garner from them lessons learned. One of the good things of the Iraq and Afghanistan war were the advances in combat medicine, and the Ukrainians are taking that to the next level. We're talking blood transfusions at point of injury and things of that nature, just absolutely unheard of 15, 20 years ago. The tactics. Now, we got to be careful. The American way of fighting would be much less this stalemate-ish. The adversaries there, the Ukrainians and the Russians, pretty much know where each other are. They occasionally foray into each other's lines. And, those types of tactics, trying to gain an exploitation but not following through, isn't how we would necessarily fight. So we got to be careful how much we draw in terms of lessons learned or just lessons observed kind of thing. And another thing that they're doing is those small units that I talked about, these multi-domain units that got some cyber positioning capability, some electronic warfare detection and positioning capability, and the ability to deliver a munition that can eliminate that. That's what we're really emulating and developing and investing in quite a bit. Thanks.
Keep answering questions. Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Just want to express my gratitude for the decision you apparently made at age 17 to have
16. I signed on my 17th birthday. I spent my 17th birthday in MEPS over next to Hojo
have
over
this
here.
career, and one that's apparently followed on by family members. I think my question may overlap with what was just asked, but my understanding is we are planning to spend $18 billion to build one new nuclear-powered battleship. The good news is the second and third ones are only going to be $12 billion apiece. But are we devoting any kind of commensurable resources to drone technology, not just offensive drones, but making sure we have the technology to protect our incredibly expensive hardware, the tanks, the helicopters, battleships, everything, from offensive drone attacks?
Yes, absolutely. So APS, Active Protective Security, is a huge line of effort in our modernization stuff. And these are systems that can spoof or potentially hijack and redirect drones, et cetera, and then protect vehicles and critical assets from the drone being able to get in there through, as you'd imagine, electronic warfare means and cyber means, et cetera. All of it's pretty sensitive, but that is where the preponderance of the money and the effort's going. The Army's committed to buying 10,000 drones a month for this next year and a half or so. We used to tie ourselves in knots with drones as it relates to airspace and things of that nature. And now we've made our training centers much more permissive to really put those things to work, where if you follow a lot of the, or if you're confined or constrained by a lot of the airspace things and stuff like that, you wouldn't hardly be able to train with this stuff at all. But we've put a lot of effort into simplifying that so we can get great use out of these things in training, so we're not seeing them in action for the first time in combat. Thanks.
Major General, again, thank you so much. Alex Zamora, such a long career, a lot of places that you visited. Is there anything that sticks out in your mind, anything that you can share, non-classified, of course, teams, locations, or experiences that you're like, oh, man, you still kind of relive, or you're like, yeah, that was really awesome?
I think a lot of folks in service would echo this. What I really loved about the Army is, and especially, all volunteer Army from the early to mid 70s to present. So everybody makes a pretty significant commitment at a very young age. You make a commitment to serve in the forces which protect our country and our way of life, knowing full well you may get hurt or worse, killed doing that. And you willingly make that commitment, and then you're surrounded by folks that make that same commitment. It is an incredible environment. It engenders immediate trust. I talk about jumping out of planes, no idea who rigged the parachute. The riggers, it's a specialty MOS, they rigged the parachute, complete trust that they did it right. The jump master on the aircraft's probably from another unit. I'm confident he or she is going to inspect our equipment right and put us out the door right. I even have confidence in the Air Force that will be over the right drop zone. It's that climate of trust, that that is what I love so much about the military. So when you say best place, probably my battalion command tour. I talked about that a little bit. You know, a battalion, you know, that top right photo there, a battalion's about 700 soldiers. You know, you train up for a rotation to Afghanistan or Iraq for about 1.5 years. And at the end of that time, you know everybody in that organization, and they certainly know you. And you really have the ability to kind of set a climate in that organization, set standards in that organization that really get traction in a meaningful way. So I think for an officer, you know, probably the most, for me anyway, the most rewarding tour was battalion commander. And, you know, that's who I find myself keeping most in touch with. But that said, still I have a bunch of buddies from Desert Storm. We're meeting at Fort Campbell next weekend, you know, 35 years afterwards. So you make these incredible friendships that endure and are stronger, frankly, than your relationships with your siblings, cousins, et cetera. I mean, it's, again, that you got to trust everybody. They got to trust you. You show your competence through action, and you therefore engender more trust because your buddies are confident that you know what you're doing and you know what they're doing. So that's probably what I like best about the Army. Thanks.
Hi, Brian. Milton Bond. Like you, I'm also a Milwaukeean. And from hearing your talk, you said you're from Milwaukee. Did you go to Pulaski? You're from the South Side?
No, I'm a tech graduate.
Oh, well, I won't hold that against you. But anyways.
Well, I live right around the corner from Pulaski.
Okay, well, anyways, the reason I'm bringing this up is you mentioned, you know, being from Milwaukee. Well, one of my buddies that I went to high school, well, actually grade school with, just talked to him actually just a couple days ago. He just retired a few years ago with his wife, and they were, you know, lieutenant colonels. And you mentioned the branches of the military, but they were nurses, and they didn't fit in those 4 branches. And I want you to explain this to me. They were nurses, and they were lieutenant colonels on the Indian reservations. And they said that they took that branch because they could stay together. But they weren't in the Army, but they were in the Army. So how does that work?
Yeah, so a couple things. You know, when I was a lieutenant there with the rifle in the top left, platoon of 42, maybe 3, 4 were married. Now in a platoon of 42, maybe 4 to 6 are not married. So it's much more a family thing. And there's a lot of dual military couples. My daughter's husband is also a helicopter pilot in the same unit. So the Army's really matured programs to keep married couples together and not, you know, execute their aviation. So the Army will go through pretty solid measures to make sure they're able to stay together at the same duty station. And, oh, I'm not sure about that entity, but speaking for the Army, I know like medical, there's a lot of medical personnel that are married and they generally can go to another duty station and serve in the same medical unit and stuff like that. Well, okay, so my wife was in the Army, but not in the Army. My wife was a Department of the Army civilian nurse, and she delivered babies at Army hospitals for. No, well, scrubs and stuff, but so that 250,000 civilians, she was one of them, and they're probably part of that. Yeah.
We'll talk later.
All right.
Thanks, Brian.
Sure.
Really appreciate the question.
All right, thank you.